Driving spaceships!
Yes. Life is a highway, and so is Commander.
And we do want to drive this all night long, but we have about an hour, so let's get right into it.
That's right. That's right. Okay, so last week at MagicCon Vegas, there was a massive Commander rules announcement that you can have vehicles as your commanders now. And you know that your boys have some thoughts to cast about that because it's the MTG Thoughtcast. Woo! I'm your host, Joseph Rubino, and across the screen or somewhere across your ears is my brother, John. John, you ready to drive, buddy?
I'm in the passenger seat, though. I'm the co-pilot.
Yeah, you're DJ for the night. I would never let you be DJ.
Bro, hand me the aux cord. No,
never. I will never do that.
Good day, good evening, everybody. Let's take the wheel on this brand new style of deck building that you will definitely enjoy. We're going to enjoy, and it's cool. I'm a big fan of this.
Absolutely. Before we get into the main topic, a few points of note. Today's episode is brought to you in part by our friends at Heavy Play. These are our favorite gaming accessories because they've got magnets in them, and in the words of the Insane Clown Posse, magnets, how do they work? I don't know, but Heavy Play does. So you can get your playmats, your deck boxes, your dice boxes that are all modular and work together. They're awesome. If you want 10% off of your first order with Heavy Play, you can use code MTG Thoughtcast at checkout or go to heavyplay.com/MTG Thoughtcast. If you want to get into all of the nitty gritty about these vehicles, spacecrafts, new commanders, play some games, all of that, you know that you can go to our Discord. Link down below. It's totally free. We just want to hang out with you. We'll be there all the time. While you're down there, if you want to support the channel for totally free, you can hit all of the YouTube buttons. Likes, comments, subscribes, helps us out a ton, helps the algorithm, lets YouTube know that you want us in your feed more often. If you're on Spotify, thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. You can give us a 5-star review if you'd like to. That'd be amazing. John.
Hey.
Should we talk about some cars?
Woo! Driving spaceships!
Yeah. Life is a highway, and so is Commander.
And we do want to drive this all night long, but we have about an hour, so let's get right into it.
That's right, that's right.
So, for anybody not aware of what has happened, last week was the MagicCon event, MagicCon Vegas, where was like obviously the traditional Magic like ensemble of things shown off or whatever. They always at these events they give like early access previews, heads up news on everything upcoming and all that jazz. And there was a lot of that at this event as well. We saw other Edge of Eternity's previews outside of what we're going to be talking about today, plus a little bit of like teaser showcases for things like Avatar and some of the early standard sets that are coming in 2026. But as part of the release of early previews that they had talked about, they had mentioned that there is a new Commander availability rules change. It's not crazy significant quite yet, only just because we don't know a lot of what these spacecrafts are about. But the overall rule that they have now changed is that essentially at the moment, it's Legendary Vehicles and Spacecrafts. But Joseph, you actually informed me that this is the overall rule is now for basically any Legendary permanent that has a power and toughness box, correct?
On the front side, yes.
On the front side.
So if you want to, we can show the video here. Gavin Verhey did this Good Morning Magic video. It's like a 6-minute video, so it's really easy to watch, but it just goes over all the rules changes. This is something that they were working on doing before all of the rules committee change, and WotC got the keys to the format, the keys to the vehicle of the format, I would say. So they were already working on all of this. It's been in the works for the last couple of years, and the wording...
That makes sense because stuff like Magic sets like these are designed several years in advance. I think actually Magic themselves just put out a video just a little bit ago saying that like the Final Fantasy thing that we just had, that was in development for over 4 years, that set was.
Yeah, exactly.
So that makes sense that they were working on all of this a while ago.
Yes. So the wording that they all landed on, because they didn't want you to just be able to use legendary vehicles if they couldn't become a creature. So this lands into some weird space with like Grist the Hunger Tide, stuff like that, that's like kind of a creature but doesn't have power and toughness and can't become a creature on the battlefield. So they landed on any legendary permanent that has a power and toughness box on the front side of it can be your commander. So anything that's like a sorcery that would have a vehicle on the back or a creature on the back or whatever, you can't use
Those
that.
can't be, yeah.
Like John said, it's currently just vehicles at the time of recording. With Edge of Eternities, it will be legendary vehicles and legendary spacecraft, which we'll talk about in just a moment, and then future-proofed for any other legendary permanents going forward that can become a creature and have a power and toughness box on the front.
Yeah, I imagine maybe like the early space for that could potentially be something like an enchantment maybe of some kind. Like we've obviously have had enchantment creatures like the Theros gods and stuff like that like their creature spells on the stack. They have a power and toughness when they're down on the battlefield, but they just turn themselves off from being creatures. They could easily implement that in the future where it's like it's some other like enchantment of some kind that's legendary. And you know what I mean? Like there's the room there to...
Or planeswalkers, or when battles return, XYZ. Like there's so many different options of like, I would love to see a planeswalker that has both a loyalty box and a power and toughness box and just kind of see what they can do with that.
Interesting.
But yeah, like we said, it's only vehicles for right now, and that's what we want to talk about because we have found some very, very, very exciting vehicles that you can play as your commanders with some unbelievably unique strategies that really it makes a reason to be playing these outside of creatures. So John, do you want to take us away with the first vehicle that you've pulled and some cool options for synergy, win conditions, whatever for these vehicle commanders?
Do we want to, though, before we get into that, do we want to take a brief aside over to the spacecraft first to talk about the whole like starting point that they have to they're working on here? Because this is a cool new sort of like twist on vehicle that is coming with Edge of Eternities. We don't know a lot of them quite yet. The only big major one that they have shown that was kind of like the showcase example of like, hey, this is a spacecraft that you could play as your general as well, is part of the main set called the Sarima. I believe that's the pronunciation on that there. It is 1 and double white for a legendary artifact spacecraft. When it enters, you search your library for a legendary creature card, reveal it, put into your hand, then shuffle, and a new activated ability on it similar to Crew called Station. You tap another creature you control and put charge counters on this card equal to its power onto the spacecraft, You can station only as a sorcery. That makes it a huge difference as compared to crewing because you can crew off turn, but this one you can't. You can only station as a sorcery, but it becomes a permanent artifact creature as long as it has 7 or more charge counters placed onto it. When it does become an artifact creature, it's a 5/5 with flying and gives other tapped legendary creatures you control indestructible.
Super good. For 3 mana and then needing to crew this a few times for it to become a creature, but then it's permanently a creature. This is a really cool design space for vehicles. I'm a vehicle enjoyer. I play Edward Kenway. That's my vehicles deck. So having new options of like vehicles that sort of fill a similar space but are better in some ways and worse in some ways, I like a ton. Also, like, man, this just uses regular old charge counters on it. So there's already plenty of ways from all the different Mirrodin sets and Proliferate and all of these different things that allow you to put extra charge counters or use the charge counters that you're putting onto this artifact for other things. So we'll cover all of that in a later episode, but that's how spacecraft works. So that is the second type of non-creature permanence that can be in your command zone with the new rules change.
Yep.
Back to today's topic, however, is vehicles. So, John,
time.
Tell me about a vehicle that you love and how you can play it in Commander.
Oh boy, let's dive in. So when we went into and I don't know if you actually did the actual like search engine search for this kind of thing. So like this change as a whole to introduce legendary vehicles as your commander, not a crazy large amount of slots
there's like
there.
15.
Yeah, like 15, 16-ish total, and over half of those are colorless. So, like, there is not a crazy amount of, like, brand new deck design that's going to come out of this, but there is some very cool and interesting strategies that you can use with a few of these new legendary creatures. And one of the coolest ones that stood out to me as, like, the potential to actually maybe be, like, really, really strong, I suppose, is from the original Kaldheim, Asika's Chariot, which everybody forgot was legendary.
It's got an apostrophe S, so.
Yeah, I forgot it was legendary for a brief while here, but this was one of the ones that they brought up in, like, in their example case of, like, oh, this is one of the cool ones that you can build. Asika's Chariot, this would be a green deck. It's 3 and a green for a legendary artifact vehicle. When it enters, you create 2/2/2 green cat creature tokens, and whenever Asika's Chariot attacks, you make a token that's a copy of target token you control. Crews for 4 and is a 4/4.
Very sick.
Very cool.
This was a powerhouse in standard. It was awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very, very strong. Obviously, the kind of goal that you would want to do when building this commander card as your face general is you're going to want to capitalize on the fact that this card itself makes you token copies of other tokens that you control. And this is obviously the broad stroke here is just, oh, this is just mono green tokens. And yeah, you can absolutely just play into that headspace. You can play things like your doubling seasons and your primal vigors and things like that. The things that allow you to exponentially double up and increase the like token output that you do, right? Like you land something like a doubling season down before Asika's Chariot, and then the Chariot comes down into play. Now it itself is making you 4 cat tokens.
That's wild.
That's very, very cool. But one of the coolest things that you can do with this is obviously capitalize on the fact that A, this is a vehicle, so you can use cards that care about becoming tapped or needing to untap and make you tokens like that. And then with this card in specific, note that it says that you make a token that is a copy of target token. That token can be anything. You can make non-creature tokens, or if the tokens that you have created are tokens of other real cards, you can start duplicating up. It's basically all those same tricks that you can do with Populate, right? The Populate cards like Druid's Deliverance and Full Flowering, things like these, that if you've got tokens of real cards, those kinds of effects can create you more tokens of them.
Yeah.
And I found a couple
green tokens. This is interesting.
I found a couple really cool ones. Ave Progenitor Ooze is a card that is able to make tokens of itself. 2 and triple green for a 2/2 legendary ooze with Storm. That it isn't legendary if it's a token, and then Ave enters with a +1/+1 counter on it for each other ooze you control. So
my Storm ooze.
The Chariot can get in, start making another token copy of your token Ave, and that token then comes in with more counters equal to the number of Aves you control.
So sick.
Very fun. Another really cool one that I found that just works well with the deck as far as ramp is Fanatic of Ronus. 1 and a green for a 1/4 Snake Druid, taps for a green. Ferocious taps for 4 green if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, and then eternalizes itself for 2 and double green. The Eternalize is a black zombie token.
That is disgusting.
So the Fanatic crews the Chariot swings in and makes you another Fanatic that's another 4/4. And all of them are producing quadruple green.
Asika's Chariot. Power 4.
Power 4. Yep. That's really silly. That's a very fun one I found. Galadrim Brigade is another very cool one that makes token copies of itself. 2 and a green for a 2/2 elf soldier. It has Squad for 1 and a green. That as it enters, as an additional cost, you can pay 1 and a green any number of times, and then as it enters, you make a token copy for each time it was squatted, and then it gives other elves you control +1/+1. Again, another really fun one to make copies of this token off of the Chariot. That every single one of these is now a new lord that's coming in and lording all the other lords.
Dumb.
Very cool. But then all of these cards that don't naturally have the ability to make token copies of themselves, anything stupid cool that you want to make a token copy of with the Asika's Chariot, bestow it with Springheart Nantuko.
It's
1
so
and a green.
sick.
1 and a green for a 1/1 insect monk. It has bestow for 1 and a green, gives the enchanted creature +1/+1, and landfall. You can pay 1 and a green. If Springheart Nantuko is attached to a creature, you make a token that's a copy of that creature. If it otherwise, it just makes a 1/1 green insect. So anything else you play in your deck that you would want to make token copies of with the Seeka's Chariot, you get Springheart Nantuko to make you at least 1 token copy. Then the Chariot will continue to make you more token copies of that.
Dang, that's so sick.
And any of these creatures, by the way, that you want to make easy copies of, the way to get them down the fastest is something really, really cool to just, like, you just cheat them down into play, because green has access to these kinds of things with stuff like Elvish Pipers and Quicksilver Amulets and stuff like that. The coolest one and the most synergistic that I found is Kona Rescue Beastie, a creature a creature that wants to be tapped. So this is the thing that you crew the Asika's Chariot with, and then your other creatures are coming into play. You're using other green effects to create token copies of those creatures, and it dogpiles on itself is really well. Kona is a 4-mana 4/3 that has survival at your second main phase. If Kona is tapped, you get to put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield.
Yeah, dude.
Cruise up a chariot like an absolute monster.
Here's what's so sick. Just doing a quick search here in EDHREC, there aren't any mono green populate commanders.
Not really, no.
You'd have to dig into green-white, which, you know, you obviously could do and then just play as mono green. But now to have an option with one of the best cards for populating in green, to have it in the command zone is, like, it's so unique to begin with, but it's also just so powerful. Like, it is, those 2 tokens come in, so it's like you're playing a creature when you cast it, as compared to a lot of the other vehicles, which is, I play this and it just sits here for a second. Mm-hmm. But to be able to do that, immediately be able to crew it in block or whatever you need to, and then as soon as you start going, just start populating whatever tokens you want to do. The Asika's Chariot might be the best of them, to be honest. But dang, that's some sick token synergies to find in there.
Yeah, there's some mana intensive line of play here where you like get the chariot turned online and then equip the chariot with Helm of the Host, and then it's making non-legendary tokens at combat and then swinging in and making another token copy of the non-legendary version, and then every single one of those is popping you out cats that can then crew it on turn and off turn.
Stupid. It's worth noting that with that interaction, if you are making a copy, like in Helm of the Host's example, where the token comes in tapped and attacking, right?
No, just makes a non-legendary token copy.
Myriad, whatever, like, makes these copies. The fact that it's crewed and a creature is not a copyable trait. So it will come in as an uncrewed vehicle. So with Helm of the Host, you could, at beginning of combat, you make the copy of it, makes the things, crew it, and then you can attack with both of them. So again, this goes back to, this is just the best one.
It's very cool. I'm a big fan of this one a lot.
Yes, I love it, man. That's a sick deck.
Pass priority.
Okay, so I'll talk about the best one of my 3 that I've picked as well. You know, I love Edward Kenway. I like Assassin's Creed Black Flag. We've got to talk about Jackdaw. Jackdaw is 1 blue and a red. This is from the Assassin's Creed set. Obviously, it's a legendary vehicle. It's a 4/4 with crew 3. And when it deals combat damage to a player, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw a card for each artifact you control. So this just, in the way that you build it and play it, it will wheel your hand every turn, which with other wheel commanders, you know that's a very powerful effect. Now, granted, in red and blue, outside of like the Sphinx that wheels you every turn, there's very few options, especially not at 3 mana, for something that you will almost guarantee wheel you every turn. You know, obviously given the fact that you have to deal combat damage, but there is some really, really sick ways to use that. Obviously, if you just go to EDHREC and you go to the tags and you find a wheels deck, there's plenty of options in there, but specifically with the Jackdaw, because it relies on extra artifacts, so many of the synergy pieces for the wheels decks just add to its artifact count to begin with. For example, Monument to Endurance is probably one of the better cards to play in the deck. This is a 3-mana artifact from Aether Drift that says whenever you discard a card, choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. And it's draw a card, create a treasure token, and each opponent loses 3 life. I apologize. I thought that the treasure token was tapped, so that just got better in my mind.
No, sir.
Yeah, so not only is this an artifact that adds to your count, but now every time you wheel, it's going to make a treasure, which is another artifact for you. So there is some really, really sick ways to abuse discarding your hand and drawing equal to artifacts. One of my other favorite artifact synergy pieces in the deck is the Black Staff of Waterdeep. This is a blue mana, so a single blue pip for a legendary artifact. You can choose not to untap it during your untap step, and then for 2 mana, you can tap it. Another target non-token artifact you control becomes a 4/4 artifact for a creature for as long as the Black Staff remains tapped. Activate only as a sorcery. So this is keep the Jackdaw crewed permanently. For 2 mana, and that artifact sits on the battlefield, so you get to just add that to your artifact count. So I would be playing the Black Staff of Waterdeep for sure. There's lots of other cool options. The Urza Powerstone Prodigy is a great creature for this deck. Not only does he have an ability to draw and discard a card as a looting effect, but whenever you discard 1 or more artifact cards, you make a tapped Power Stone, which adds to your artifact count, helps add mana for your other artifacts going forward. Similarly, Thopter Fabricator from Aether Drift is a sick pick in here because it's a 3-mana 4/4 vehicle with flying and crew 2, and whenever you draw your second card each turn, you make a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature with flying. So all of these things that's like, I'm going to discard a card and I'm also going to make an artifact off of this, or I'm also going to draw an extra card off of this, is just going to get ridiculous. One of the problems with this deck is going to be, how do I keep getting in for combat damage? Especially because with any like regular commander creature, you would typically be able to equip it with something or enchant it with an aura or whatever, and you just can't really do that with vehicles because they become non-creatures again at the end of turn. So like equipment falls off of them, XYZ.
Yeah, barring unless you've done something like the Black Staff or something.
Exactly,
like that,
right. In any normal case, it becomes a non-creature, and then things like equipment and auras would fall off of it.
Yeah. Now you're still in the same scenario of you needing like 2 plus something pieces to make sure it's a creature at all times. So we're still at the same problem.
Yes. This is one of my favorite finds for synergy pieces for the deck because counters will stay on even when it becomes a non-creature. Those counters just stay there, and then whenever you go to crew it again, it still has all of the buffs from the counters. So Scavenged Brawler is from the Brothers War Commander set, and it's a 6-mana 4/4 with Flying, Vigilance, Trample, and Lifelink. But the important part is that for 5 mana and exiling it from your graveyard, you choose target creature and put 4 +1/+1 counters, a flying counter, a vigilance counter, a trample counter, and a lifelink counter on that creature. So this is an unbelievable thing to be discarding to the first few wheel effects, putting in your graveyard, and then on a following turn, after you crew it, you pay the 5 mana, you just dump this thing's power, toughness, and all of its effects as counters onto the Jackdaw, so that even when it becomes a non-creature, it just holds on to all of those effects on top of it. And I will tell you that an 8/8 with Flying, Vigilance, Trample, and Lifelink and Wheel when it hits is going to end the game very soon. Especially, I mean, let's talk about the benefit of playing vehicles as commanders. They don't die to board wipes typically because they're sorcery speed and your vehicles aren't creatures for the time that your opponents would be casting board wipes. So you can just set up this gigantic creature that's like almost untouchable outside of artifact removal on your opponent's turns. So that is an unbelievably good reason to be playing this. Handful of other things I'd be doing in this deck. You could be playing a Magmakin Artillerist, which is when you discard 1 or more cards, you deal that much damage to each opponent. A couple of ways to win the game would be like the Locust God, you draw a card, you make a 1/1 blue, red insect with flying and haste, or something like Psychosis Crawler, which is also an artifact, which, whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses a life. And then in combination with all of those things, a really great synergy piece is something like Encroaching Mycosynth, which is 3 and a blue for an artifact that just says non-land permanents you control are artifacts in addition to their other types. So as you make, the same is true for permanent spells and things in your deck that you don't control. So there's a handful of other synergy pieces, but it's mostly with things like the Locust God that's making all of these tokens, because then they'll be artifact tokens, and then all of a sudden you're just doubling your hand every time you hit with Jackdaw. So I'm particularly excited about this one.
That's very cool, yeah, and especially as well being one of the legendary vehicles that opens you up into multiple colors as well.
Yes,
like
for
there's
sure.
There's greater building opportunity there with the fact that you just get access to have more than just one color. Because like we had talked about at the kind of the start of this conversation here, is that while we do have previously established legendary vehicles, a very large handful of them are just colorless. So they still follow the same building restrictions. So being able to have access to blue and red, the two most prominent artifact colors, with a legendary permanent that cares about your artifacts, there's some good incentive there, like you said, to build around this.
Yeah. This would be the one that I would be the most interested in actually building. The rest of them that I will be talking about, at least, are very theoretical and very hypothetical, but still fun nonetheless. We love theory crafting here on the show.
Oh yeah, do we need a theory craft one? I can lead us into my next
Let's
choice
get weird,
right here.
dude.
Let's get weird. So this little friend that I wanted to bring up is, you definitely is the most open-ended as far as like, oh, if you want to build this as a legendary type of deck, you could really drive this
Hey.
You could drive this deck into multiple different directions just because the sort of feel of it is generic black good stuff. But I like this idea of what this is. So my next legendary vehicle that I wanted to talk about comes from also the set Aether Drift as well, because there was a vehicle theme there. Let's talk about The Last Ride.
Yeah, baby.
Let's drive. Did that again.
This one's particularly interesting in Commander.
So The Last Ride is a single black mana for a legendary artifact vehicle. It crews for 2 and is a 13/13, but it gets -X/-X, where X is your life total. But then an activated ability on the vehicle itself that says for 2 and a black, and you pay 2 life and you draw a card. And that's kind of it. That's kind of all it is. It's greed. For anybody familiar with the enchantment, it's called greed. I guess it's also like, necropotence is kind of also in that headspace as well, where it's like one of these permanents that says you pay some amount of cost, usually life, and it gives you a card back out of it as well. What's just really interesting about The Last Ride is that it can come down basically the first turn of the game. Yes. You know what I mean? It's down and it's available and it's ready to go for you right out the gate. And it just sits there and lets you be this activated ability super early in the game that lets you pay life to just draw cards. And both of those aspects are things that are very, very useful within Black's wheelhouse here. A cool synergy piece that you can have in here is a legendary creature called Villis, Broker of Blood.
Yeah, man.
5 and triple black legendary creature demon. Is an 8/8 with flying, with its own activated ability of black, pay 2 life, and target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. And then just a static that just whenever you lose life, you draw that many cards. So now not only Villis's own activated ability is drawing cards, but activating The Last Ride for 3 mana and 2 life and drawing a card is also drawing you 2 more additional cards because you're paying 2 life. And that'll be true amongst the entire deck of basically anything that says that you are paying life or you get attacked. If you get attacked and lose life as well, you're going to be drawing those many cards as well. Obviously, there's a huge mana cost difference here between The Last Ride and Villas, but you're in black. You're going to be doing Reanimator and stuff like that. But one of the cool ideas that I like with this is like it's life self-sacrifice thing, and there's a huge variety of cards that allow you to ding your own life total crazy low down with stuff like The Last Ride and other stuff that lets you pay life, and then you just swap those life totals around with the cards like Repay in Kind.
Oh yeah.
Repay in Kind, 5 and double black for a sorcery that each player's life total becomes the lowest life total among all players. So you bring yourself down to like 8 or 6 from activating the last ride and just, repay in kind. All of you are now down to 6 life.
This is dope.
That instant drain from somebody really, really high up in life down to really, really low. That is like those kinds of things. Those are considered changes in life totals, right? So like either if you're gaining life or something resets your life to a particular total, or an opponent is losing a really, really high amount, or their life total is being set to something a particular amount, you can capitalize on cards that like trigger off of either you gaining life or opponents losing life. This is something like the Blood Bond combo. This is a great home for a synergy combo like this here, right? Like especially Exquisite Blood itself, right? You bring yourself crazy low, have Exquisite Blood already down, and then you do something like repay in kind. That is your opponent's losing that crazy high amount of life. That life is then set for the triggers to go off for Exquisite Blood. So like you say, you set yourself to the lowest, bring everybody down to your life total. Then Exquisite Blood sees that they have lost all that life, and you shoot yourself right back up. You're essentially exchanging life totals again, exactly like that. And then you just throw in Sanguine Bond and literally all the other cards that combo between Exquisite Blood, Bloodthirsty Conqueror, Vito, Sanguine Bond. The Defiant Bloodlord is a Sanguine Bond as well. It's very stupid.
I'm into this, man.
Yeah, and then let's just play all these other cards in here as well that care about, you giving you life back as well. Black is a very, very heavy life adjusting color, especially life gain. A lot of people associate white with being the life gain color, but no, black has been doing this from basically the get-go, and you can just be playing all these things that give you exponential life back to be able to keep paying into the last ride, to keep giving you more cards to then play down more of these. You're changing your life and gaining life, right? So like a real cheap, easy one I found here is Creeping Bloodsucker. 1 and a black for a 1/2 vampire that at the beginning of your upkeep, it deals 1 damage to each opponent, and you gain life equal to the damage dealt this way.
Easy.
Stupid. That's 3 life a turn. Easy. Ayara, First of Locthwain, same thing. Triple black, 2/3 legendary elf noble, that when she or another black creature enters under your control, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain a life. All of these things, and it also sacrifices another black creature to draw a card. Very, very cool. Let's see here. Pontiff of Blight as well, same thing. Every spell that you cast is now going to be having Extort on it. And then when it gives other creatures you control Extort. So every spell that you cast for every creature and spare black mana that you have available, they can be like, I cast this cheap little life adjusting creature here, pay 3 other black mana into it, and each of you will lose a life for all of that. I'll gain 3 per instance of Extort. So like the life loss part of this deck that you would build sounds like it can be intensive, but you just pair everything else in here that cares about your own life going up and down respectively. Easy picks, easy way to just do generic black good stuff in here. A very cool, interesting thing that I had found, though, to do with this is that if you are playing these legendary vehicles as your commanders, that counts as being your commander. Does it not? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it has been turned online to be a creature or not. If it is your designated commander in the command zone, because the last ride comes down so stupid cheap at a black mana, this gives you access to have things like Deadly Rollick available at the very beginning of the game. And how, we all hear the phrase bolt the bird, you know what I mean? How often is it that people are banking in their early games on their early mana dorks or their delighted halflings or their birds of paradise or their own easy, cheap commander coming down stupid early? If your last ride is not necessarily doing anything immediately right out the get-go, it's your turn 1 access to have Deadly Rollick ready to go.
You heard it here first, folks. The last ride is better than Rogak.
I mean, there's a reason that something like Rogsai is one of the most popular competitive commanders of all time, is because especially Rograk himself comes down the first turn that you get.
Turn 0 functionally.
Right? So having access to your commander in play for any of those kinds of cards that care about that kind of thing, It's really, really fun. So is this the strongest mono black good stuff commander you could build? I'd say probably not, but having access to greed basically the first turn of the game, and then you just play all of this life-changing good stuff for the rest of the value, throw in anything you want there as far as Reanimator or, you know, especially Wraths. This could be a deck that you could play Wraths in as well, especially because the last ride is not going to be a creature 90% of the game. So you just play Last Ride, you play Wraths, especially those ones that gain you life as creatures die as well. Blood Artists, Zulaport, Cutthroats, all of that. Just play the most degenerate. You are changing your life total up and down, paying life into the last ride anytime you start running out of gas.
It's crazy how many car terms we already use for Commander. So playing the last ride feels similar to like Erebos, God of the Dead, which is, 3 and a black for a 5/7 that's indestructible and isn't exactly a creature until a certain point, and then has this greed ability attached to it as well. So it's like playing Erebos, but it costs 1 mana instead.
And I don't know. I mean, I bet there's probably a weird corner case scenario where you care about having this come down stupid cheap, crewing it, and then it dies immediately to its own -X/-X.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Actually just gonna, like, is there some combo that we can try here to like infinitely loop the last ride because it just comes in and immediately dies if it becomes creature? I don't know. Somebody smarter than me can figure that out.
You figure out how we can make Death's Shadow work in Commander, and then we'll chat.
Literally. I mean, there's a handful of Death's Shadow like effects, but yes, I love that. That's a really sweet deck. Mono Black is also a very fun, very degenerate deck to play to begin with. Yeah, I'm sure there's a Sir Conrad loop somewhere. All right. Well, I'll take us on to the next one. Do you want to take a road trip with the boys?
Let's go. Road trip.
Let's talk about the Regalia. This is a 4 mana. It's all generic mana. So this is a colorless identity deck with the Regalia at the helm. It's 4 mana for a 4/4 with haste and crew 1. Super cheap to crew. And whenever it attacks, you reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a land card. Put that card on the battlefield tapped, the rest in the bottom of your library in a random order. So this is landfall in colorless. There's a couple of different directions that I thought about taking this. One of them, there's very few landfall abilities in colorless in Commander specifically. One of them is on a sticker. So if you want to play some bumper stickers, just make sure you're playing Werewolf Lightning Mage. That is the sticker sheet that has a ability sticker of landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on this permanent. So that's neat if you want to be doing that. There really is hardly any support for stickers or attractions that would put those stickers on your creatures in colorless. So I would say this is a meme, but is also funny. So I started thinking like, okay, this is finding lands, it's attacking. What can we really do with this? And I really came across that piqued my interest is like utility land kindred. Where you're sort of playing this lands deck because you get access to one of the best lands in the format, which is Field of the Dead. So that is absolutely the best landfall trigger in colorless, and it's on a land already. So the Regalia can, flip into it. Field of the Dead is banned in a lot of things, but not Commander. It's a land that enters taps for a colorless. And whenever it or another land enters under your control, if you control 7 or more lands with different names, you make a 2/2 black zombie. So Field of the Dead is a win condition in this. As you're flipping into new lands, you're getting multiple landfall triggers per turn. There's also things like Urza's Cave, which help us to find that land, help us find Field of the Dead. You also have like Thespian Stage, Vesuva, all of these different things that just make additional copies of Field of the Dead. Mm-hmm. What's ironic is if you look at the art for the Regalia, it's like it's driving through the Field of the Dead. So it's just driving through the desert. So I really love this as a not necessarily landfall, but just a colorless lands matters deck. You get to play a lot of really great board wipes in colorless as well that are one-sided. So not only do you have All is Dust, which is a 7-mana a kindred sorcery, Eldrazi. Each player sacrifices all colored permanents they control. So in a deck that's full of colored creatures, that's everything but lands. You keep all of your lands, all of your creatures, because everything of yours is colorless anyway. So part of the value of the Regalia is that you're playing an extra land every turn, so you're ramping as well. So these 7-mana costs are so much easier to pay, and you don't have to worry about colors or anything. There's also a 5-mana version that's like cheaper, but is a little bit worse, and that's, let me find it again, Selective Obliteration. This is 3 colorless for a sorcery. Each player chooses a color, then exile each permanent unless it's colorless or it's only the color its controller chose. So they keep nothing that's multicolored. They only keep colorless things and one. It's like if you're playing like a Bant deck and you choose white, you only get to keep your mono white permanents and your colorless permanents. Everything else gets exiled. So it just gets around indestructible and everything. So you have these ridiculous board wipes to play that, again, don't affect your board. You've got ramp in the command zone with the Regalia. You have abilities to find extra additional lands. And then you just get to play things like Silent Arbiter as your, like, So it's a 4-mana 1/5, so it can crew the Regalia. And it says no more than one creature can attack each combat, and no more than one creature can block each combat. So you're playing sort of this like Staxy, like I'm really controlling everything on the board so that my Regalia can keep attacking and keep finding lands to try to get to something like the Field of the Dead. There's also so many good utility lands that this can go in a bunch of different directions. You can play creature lands. You've got like Mutavaults and Mishra's Workshop and things like that. That all are colorless identity that become creatures. So the Regalia is helping to find those. You've also got access to like Glacial Chasm loops. If you're playing things like Crucible of Worlds in the deck, which I would recommend that you do as well. So Glacial Chasm, if no one's played with it, this is a land with cumulative upkeep 2 life, which means that if you don't pay its cumulative upkeep for each Eon counter that's on it, and you get an Eon counter every upkeep, it sacrifices itself. And then when it comes into play, you also have to sacrifice a land. Again, not a huge cost when our commander is playing us an additional land every turn. And it says, you cannot attack. All damage dealt to you is reduced to 0. Seems counterintuitive, but the way that you play this in a deck like this is you want to play it in your second main phase so that you get the attack in, and then you can play this, sacrifice a land, keep it around for the turn cycle, and then on your cumulative upkeep, you don't pay the cost. So it sacrifices itself, goes to the graveyard. You then get the ability to attack, and then on your second main, using your Crucible of Worlds or whatever is pulling lands back from the graveyard for you, you get to play it again in your second main phase. And again, you've gotten an extra land from the Regalia, so that sacrifice of land isn't setting you back any further. It's just undoing what your commander's doing. But at the cost to be able to play Glacial Chasm, it's ridiculous. So the whole deck, for me, would be unbelievable utility lands, lands like Field of the Dead, which are win conditions in and of themselves. And you also get like all the Urza lands, like you get to play Tron in here. You could play this with Eldrazi at the in the deck because you're just ramping super hard. And then just a bunch of stacks and board wipes that are one-sided. This started as like, this is kind of theory crafty. I'm not sure if I'm a huge fan of this, into like, man, this is kind of sweet. The problem is a lot of these utility lands are really expensive. So like the Field of the Dead, which is kind of the reason why the deck would work, is like a $40 card. So if you've got the cash for that or a printer, you could potentially be playing this deck. But man, so many good win conditions. I really love like Rise of the Eldrazi in this deck, which is 9 colorless for the cast trigger of all the original Titans. So it can't be countered. You destroy a permanent. Target player draws 4 cards, and then you take an extra turn after this one, and it exiles itself. So there's cool things like that as you just keep going, like you're on a road trip with your boys, and you're just finding as many great colorless win conditions as you can.
I almost want to imagine, and kind of you talking about this card, I I almost kind of want to think like a complete opposite of what you're thinking about. And like, yeah, there are some good like colorless utility lands. I would almost want this deck to maybe be just those utility lands, and it's like as fast as we can get with artifact acceleration, and then as the Regalia attacks, because it reveals until you hit a land, right? So if there's only like 3 or 4 combo-y lands in the deck and you're getting to the Regalia, like you're using artifacts and like Lotus Pedestals and 0 cost artifacts, then the Regalia guaranteed. So I'm thinking like Dark Depths. So like, what if your deck
this is a great Dark Depths deck.
What if your deck is just Dark Depths and Thespian Stage, and then your mana acceleration is coming from artifacts, and the Regalia guarantees goes and gets down into those lands.
Wild.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. See, again, like when we started the notes for this episode, I was like, yeah, like vehicles is kind of a fun theory, but like there's nothing else that does this in colorless. So if you want to be playing that specific thing, like this is kind of crazy. This is very like your Junderdome brain of like, oh wait, are you gonna try to play Charl Belcher deck too?
Step 1, artifact rocks to get down the Regalia. Step 2, your only land is Inventor's Fair. Step 3, Tutor Belcher. Step 4,
Tutor Belcher, play it. Yeah. So this would have to be a lot of like, oh man, Jeweled Amulet and Lotus Petal and Mana Vault. Like this is a very Game Changers heavy deck, but like neat for sure. You also have to figure out a way to crew it. So who knows?
Ornithopter Paradise. That's a 0.
Does not crew it. But yeah, I think this is awesome. One of the really cool landfall effects, though, that I did find in colorless on this artifact is called the Eternity Vessel. Have you heard of this, John?
I can't say no.
This is a 6 mana artifact. It enters the battlefield with X charge counters on it, where X is your life total. Landfall, your life total becomes equal to the number of charge counters on Eternity Vessel.
Oh.
So it locks in place whatever life total you have whenever you play this. And of course, there's ways to manipulate charge counters like we talked about, proliferating or, whatever you want to do. And then every time a land enters, it just resets your life to however many charge counters are on it. So you could, it sort of works in a similar way as Glacial Chasm of like you're taking no damage for a turn cycle, where like if you have the Eternity Vessel out with the Regalia, I mean, at minimum, because the problem with Eternity Vessel is if you run out of lands in your hand and you don't draw one, then all of a sudden you can't reset it. But the Regalia is going to get you a land every turn, no matter what. So, you turn cycle goes around, you can take as much damage as you want, which is great because your commander isn't a creature on off turns. And then it gets back to your turn. Like, cool, I'm just going to reset to 36. Pass turn. Like, try again, I guess.
Good luck.
So that's neat. And this legitimately seems like a great deck for Seer Sundial as well, which is a card that I know, I love it, and I've never found a place for it because all of the landfall decks already have so much card draw baked in with like Aisi and Tatyava and all of these things that like, hey, we have a colorless landfall deck that can absolutely pay 4 extra mana every turn to draw 2 extra cards in colorless. This is awesome. So I genuinely love this. This seems so much fun.
That's very cool. That's cool. I actually have also crafted one together using a colorless legendary vehicle as well. But I have gone the opposite direction as sort of like what you were on about. Like obviously, the Regalia cares a lot about being able to find your lands, and you're going to be playing heavy into like the fact that you just got all these colorless utility ones. I wanted to build around Weatherlight and decide to just go heavy in on just the fact of historic, which is just going to be strictly playing artifacts essentially, right? So like you still get in the same vibe of needing your colorless lands, but as compared to the deck that you had described about of being like you care about casting the colorless stuff specifically, the Weatherlight here is going to be looking for finding you historic permanents, and specifically we're just going all in on just artifact synergy. This is colorless artifact historic.
Sweet.
Weatherlight itself from the original Dominaria 2018 is 4 colorless mana, or just 4 mana for a legendary artifact vehicle. It has flying, and when it deals combat damage to a player, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a historic card from among them and put it into your hand, and the rest to the bottom in a random order. Cruise for 3 and is a 4/5.
Beautiful. I love Weatherlight.
Yeah, and it's a similar feel to like what the Regalia does, where like it does its thing based on being able to go into combat. This one, the biggest difference is it gives you a selection from the top 5 that you have. Historic as a category, for those a little bit unfamiliar, is that if it is an artifact, a legendary, or a saga, it is considered historic. And so what we are looking to do with this type of deck is we're just going to go all in, cash on the table here of everything is an artifact, right? Almost everything we're going to cast is either going to be an artifact, it can tutor for artifacts, it's going to drop the cost of artifacts, or it is historic in some other fashion. The closest example that I was able to pull that, like, if you would build the Weatherlight as your commander, the closest example that I could find was from the Assassin's Creed set, the Capitone Triad.
Yeah, dude. The Capitolian.
Capitoli.
The Macaroni Triad.
The Macaroni. This one is Rotini. This one is Rigatoni.
Absolutely.
It's 10 generic for a legendary creature God Artificer. It costs 1 less to cast for each historic card in your graveyard. And then an activated ability of exiling any number of historic cards from your graveyard with total mana value 30 or greater. You get an emblem with creatures you control have base power and toughness 9/9. So
Dang.
this was the next closest that I could find as far as like being a colorless that cared specifically about historic. Traxxas is also in that similar vibe as well, and obviously goes in this deck as well.
Yeah.
A 4-mana 7/7 with trample that it enters the battlefield tapped and doesn't untap during your untap step, but when you cast a historic spell, it untaps. And so this is the sort of headspace that we are looking at here. Like, we want to be playing historic cards. We want to have as many historics down in play. If they end up going to the graveyard, we have things we can get them back with. Just anything we cast meets the condition of being historic, right? Artifacts mostly in specific as well, so we'll be playing stuff like Foundry Inspector and Cloud Key, both of those basically named on artifact. They will drop the cost of artifacts specifically. Joyra's Familiar is probably the best of these as well, because not only does it drop the cost of just artifacts, the bird specifically says that it drops the cost on historic, so that drops the cost obviously of casting stuff like the Weatherlight and all other artifacts that we're playing as well. But some of these other the other historic cards are in this deck, like the Planeswalkers and the other legendary creatures like the Capicoli Triad.
Yes.
This will drop the cost on those as well. Speaking of those other historic permanents, like these, we have a nice selection nowadays of colorless planeswalkers, I guess specifically Ugins, but there is that new Tezzeret coming very soon. We'll be talking about him in a few weeks as well. But especially Ugins, like most Ugins all care about casting your colorless cards or care about casting or like having colorless things, and that's artifacts, for lack of a better term.
Especially Eye of the Storm, man.
Oh, yeah.
That card is incorrect. I cannot believe that they printed that static ability on him of, he exiles a colored permanent, and then every colorless spell while he's in play also just has exile a colored permanent attached to it. This is ridiculous.
And then he also gains life and draws cards, makes you 3 colorless mana, and then searches for any number of colorless non-land cards.
Will also play my deck as his ultimate that takes 2 turns to do. What a broken card.
Ugin the Ineffable is definitely way more fair in that regard as well. It's the 6 mana one that makes your colorless spells cost 2 less to cast, and then does a plus that exiles your top card. You make a 2/2 spirit, colorless spirit, and then when that spirit dies, you get the exiled card back to your hand, and then also destroys a target permanent that's 1 or more colors. Very cool. Those Ugins are very, very cool.
That Ugin's particularly good because, as we've been talking about, you need creatures to be able to crew these vehicles. So the fact that he reduces the mana cost and also puts creatures onto the battlefield is particularly strong with a vehicle in the command zone.
Right, because you need these things to be able to actually crew the Weatherlight, to be able to start getting in, to be able to get these extra cards into your hand as well. With being able to have so much extra like card selection, specifically off the Weatherlight itself, I kind of really wanted to make this deck, obviously artifact in its focus as well, but there are vast amounts of just combos that you can assemble together using just colorless and just artifacts, and specifically, like, how many different ways are there to make infinite mana off of Basalt Monolith? You know what I mean? Tons.
What doesn't it combo with?
Exactly. And then you just throw all of that mana into something like Staff of Domination is just a card that you can pull, and then just all the abilities that Staff does is just really, really stupid.
Yeah.
But both halves of I think you actually talked about Mycosynth Lattice earlier as well with your own deck.
I talked about encroaching Mycosynth, which is like the blue version of it.
Oh, excuse me. Well, Mycosynth Lattice is the one that I'm going to talk about. Both it and Karn the Great Creator are historic. So these are pieces. Yep. These are pieces that the Weatherlight can get you out of your top 5 if you're able to connect with them. Those unfamiliar how this works. Lattice is a 6-mana artifact that makes all permanents artifacts in addition to their types, and then does other stuff about making them not colored anymore, and you can spend mana as though it were mana of any color. But Karn the Great Creator in specific has a static ability in his top part that says activated abilities of artifacts your opponents control can't be activated. If your opponent's lands are artifacts, the tap ability to make mana can now no longer be done. So this is a colorless lockout that you just then continue to play. I mean, they would have access to anything that they still already have down on their battlefield. So you're not just like completely out of the woods against 3 players if they already have some permanents down in play. But Karn and Lattice is a very, very good way to make sure that nothing else can come down past that point.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm just a huge fan of cards like Mystic Forge, that if most of your deck is artifacts as well, even if you're not getting a bunch of cards off of the top from Weatherlight, something like Mystic Forge would allow you to just keep casting things off the top of your library. Also helps you set up as well. Like, you can activate Mystic's Forge last ability of paying a life and exiling the top card of your library. You could do that before the Weatherlight connects, so that if you, because you get to look at your top card, and if you know it's something that the Weatherlight wouldn't be able to grab for you, like a land, you can just exile that off away and make sure that your top 5 selection is the best possible choices you have available to you.
Super good, dude. It's not like these combos haven't existed in colorless commander decks before, but
no, of course
a
not.
Colorless commander that grants you this much card advantage and card selection just has not existed at this cost. You were relegated to playing something like one of the Kozileks that draws you a bunch of cards, but those are all like 9, 10, 11 mana, that like having this 5 mana thing that comes in and continues to attack and do commander damage as it's attack. Like, it's a dragon functionally, and just continues to draw you these cards. Like, it's sick.
Yeah. Like I said, this was just the focus that I wanted to do, to kind of be colorless, that not directly cared about Eldrazi. You absolutely could put Titans and stuff in here because they being legendary, those are historic. So, however direction you'd kind of want to focus this on, just the fact that the Weatherlight can just grab historic things, this is why I wanted to focus it more specifically on the colorless planeswalkers, colorless legendary creatures, and definitely more than anything, artifacts. And this would be a very cool one to throw, like, any artifact combos. That, y'all know me. I love a good combo. I love
a combo, man.
This stuff. Delicious. The Lattice Karn thing, it's something I've been actually looking to get into my personal artifact deck ahead of time. But, like, just being able to potentially try something like that in colorless. Also, colorless decks are fun, right?
Really fun.
They're much easier to build nowadays, now that we've had a huge amount of like supplementary product and things like that to help us support building the mana base, especially for things like this. I'd say give it a try. If you've never built a colorless either artifact or Eldrazi or historic or whatever, if you've never done a colorless deck before, absolutely give them a try sometime. Something like this, Weatherlight itself is relatively cheap for a card is concerned, right? You could build an artifact deck like this very budget friendly.
I had a Traxos Voltron deck for a minute that was just equipment and Traxos. But again, the problem comes when you just run out of card advantage because you're in colorless. So you would love to have something like the Weatherlight in play to be able to get your like equipment and get your Traxos out, which makes that a much stronger piece to put in the command zone. But again, it just didn't exist. So being able to play the Weatherlight and then have all of those pieces in the 99 is such a stronger play pattern than having your like, this is my big creature that I'm going to put in and oops, I'm out of cards now. I love it. Well,
I like it.
speaking of Voltron, I'll take us away with my last deck of the evening here. And this is insurance fraud. This is the RMS Titanic.
Yay!
This is a 4 mana. It's a red deck, so it's 3 in red for a 7/1 flying trample with crew 3. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, sacrifice it and create that many treasure tokens. So, boys, we are playing Elder Dragon Highlander again because this has 7 power. This is a hefty 7 power flying trample, and it's probably going to die anyway. Is so sweet. But there are plenty of ways to get around that, because if you reread the ability of the RMS Titanic, it does not say sacrifice it when you do create that many treasure tokens. There's no intervening if, there's no when. It's just one trigger. So if you can find a way to get around that sacrifice, you still make all the treasures. So a couple of very fun ways to do this. I know we talked about how equipment isn't very good on vehicles, but I'm retracting all of that for this deck because it's going to be making so much mana that you can just afford to keep equipping things onto it, especially cards like Assault Suit, which is it's an equipment. It's 4 mana and it equips for 3. Equipped creature gets +2/+2, has haste, can't attack you or planeswalker you control, and importantly, can't be sacrificed. And then at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, you may have that player gain control of equipped creature until the end of turn. So you don't have to pass it on. You can just put this on as, oop, this can't be sacrificed. I'm going to deal 9 damage to you, make 9 treasures, and not sacrifice my Titanic. That is exactly how it works. The other equipment that I would love to play in this deck is Sword of Hearth and Home, because it's obviously one of the sort of, push and shove. So it's 3 mana, equips for 2. Equipped creature gets +2/+2, has protection from green and from white. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, exile up to 1 target creature you own. Then search your library for a basic land card. Put both cards onto the battlefield under your control, then shuffle. So this blinks when it deals combat damage. So you can hit and then stack those triggers to do the blink first, and then you make your 9 treasures, and the RMS Titanic comes back into play.
That's stupid.
Pretty sick, huh? Obviously, there's some other great ways to kind of blink from the graveyard as well. Obviously, Goblin Welder gets talked about a lot with this, because if you're in the My Titanic is going to get sacrificed plan, you can just use the Goblin Welder, which can essentially swap an artifact from play and an artifact in a graveyard. You just sacrifice one of the treasure that it makes and get your Titanic back. So you, at the cost of 1 treasure, you get to just keep your Titanic in play. There's also obviously the plan of you can sacrifice this to the command zone and just replay it.
Yeah.
Super easy. So there's a handful of things that I would be playing with, the ability to recur artifacts. I wish that Felden of the Third Path worked, because I really want to do that. But Felden only grabs an artifact creature in your graveyard, or grabs a creature card in your graveyard. And obviously,
Boo.
I know a vehicle is not a creature in the graveyard, but Duretti Scrap Savant does exactly the same thing that Goblin Welder does. So there's a lot of that. Obviously, we wish that we could play Cranial Plating in this deck, or Cranial Ram, but we can't. We do have access to Adaptive Omni Tool, which is a 2 mana equipment that says equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. And then whenever it attacks, you kind of do a Weatherlight thing, actually. Whenever equipped creature attacks, you look at the top 6 cards of your library, reveal an artifact from among them, and put it into your hand, the rest on the bottom in a random order, and it equips for 3. So again, this kind of goes against the heuristic I talked about earlier of we don't want to play equipment in this deck, but we want to just crew and then immediately throw everything onto the Titanic using some of the treasures that it's made already or whatever. There's also some really excellent ways to win the game outside of the RMS Titanic hitting. Hellkite Tyrant requires 20 artifacts to win the game, and the Titanic makes a lot of those when it hits. Titanic doesn't work well with Double Strike, so we can't really do that with it. But what we can do is City on Fire, which is now hear me out here. If a source would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals triple that damage instead. John, what is 7 times 3?
21.
Exactly. From your commander.
Hey, 21.
This is take someone out on attack.
Yay.
Oh, and also make 21 treasure tokens when it hits and sacrifices itself. So good. So City on Fire, I'm not typically a fan of like damage doublers, damage triplers, but the fact that this triples and that equals exactly commander damage is really, really sick. Obviously, this is an insane Academy Manufactor deck. Oops, we broke Academy Manufactor.
Rise.
The one other thing I found that was really cool was this Blast Furnace Hellkite, which was just a way, again, to use the RMS Titanic before it sacrifices itself to still get all those treasures. But Blast Furnace Hellkite is a 9-mana 5/5 dragon with flying and double strike, and creatures attacking your opponents have double strike, but it has this ability called Artifact Offering on it, which is you may cast this spell as though it had flash by sacrificing an artifact and paying the difference in mana cost between this and the sacrificed artifact. Mana cost includes color. So you can sacrifice with the trigger on the stack of the RMS Titanic. You can play this Blast Furnace Hellkite, sacrifice itself. It now only costs 5 mana to play this thing. And then you still get all of your treasures from the Titanic as well, obviously. And then this Blast Furnace Hellkite will just sit there as your opponents now get double strike attacking each other.
That's silly.
Really, really cool. So again, like just find cool ways to abuse the fact that there's no intervening if in the trigger of RMS Titanic to be able to literally commit insurance fraud, which is the reason why that ability exists. For those who don't know, this is from Doctor Who, and the whole episode was that the RMS Titanic was being crashed for the insurance money. So like it got preserved, he still gets the insurance money, it's a whole thing. So it's cool that they've given the flavor of that in this ability and being able to find cool ways. I think the Sword of the Hearth and Home is my favorite of them, of just like blink on damage, plus the 2/2. But man, this is awesome. It literally feels like playing an Elder Dragon because it's 7 mana with flying and trample. It's just going to deal so much damage. I already play RMS Titanic in my Edward Kenway deck, and it's the best vehicle in there because that 7 flying trample just deals so much damage that being able to play it in the command zone and building a whole deck around always having it in play is ridiculous. Also, the Reaver Cleaver. That's something that you should be playing in here as well.
More treasures.
Double your treasures. Reckless Fire Weaver is a great win condition in here as well. Just when an artifact enters, it deals a damage to each opponent.
You had mentioned the being able to like do like a double strike damage doesn't necessarily work as far as being able to make extra treasures off its trigger's turn. It's still an it's still a triggered ability that could be copied though, right?
Yeah, like Strionic Resonator is really great in here as well.
Strionic Resonator, Lithoform Engine, that kind of stuff. You could
just copying those.
Yep, because you're making excess treasures and then as well that like the mana that sinks back into doubling up the trigger, like it just keeps exponentially growing itself.
Yep.
And then like you had said, for a Fire Weaver or anything else that cares about artifacts coming into play.
Yeah. So again, like because you don't actually have to sacrifice the Titanic in order to get those treasures, copying the triggered ability with the Strionic Resonator still is going to make you all those extra treasures because the triggered ability doesn't care whether the Titanic's actually sacrificed or not.
Yep.
Really, really sick. This was my I've obviously have to talk about this.
And obviously these are not obviously all the strategies that you could use as far as the vehicle commanders are concerned. There's a whole plethora of other legendary vehicles. And then obviously, like we had mentioned about as well, we're not in the spoiler season yet as far as the time of recording here, but we're going to have a full selection of potentially legendary spacecrafts, both coming in the main set. And they also had mentioned the face commanders of the precons that they're making for this set are also going to be legendary spacecraft. So, put a pin in what we're talking about today. We'll be coming back around to this idea about talking about potential spacecraft commanders here in a couple of weeks. But what we have available already from what has previously been printed throughout Magic's history, these are cool. They really kind of change up the idea on like how you can build some of these decks with a new type of like commander at your helm. And it's just interesting enough that I feel like you don't have to jump in and making a deck of this type here, but the fact that you can, and it opens up a little bit of like creativity, unorthodox deck building is very sweet. I'm a big fan of being able to just include types and styles of decks that just break the traditional mold when it comes to building your commander decks.
Yeah, me as well. As I was building these, I fully expected to find like, oh, this is just going to be this deck, except you can play a vehicle as the commander. And what I found over and over again in the 3 decks that I kind of talked about was, no, these are really unique. These are really individual, either for the mana cost that they're at or for the abilities that they have that just makes for new strategies. So this is like good on Wizards of the Coast for making this a rule and working so hard to get all of the wording correctly so that we can do this, because more options is always better. We'll always be an advocate of, well, if I have this option to play this, that's better than not having the option to play this.
Precisely. And we then would like to hear from you about what kind of legendary vehicles or spacecrafts potentially. Like, come back around to this episode in a few weeks. Tell us about your spacecraft deck. I'd love to hear it. But
please.
if you've got any of your favorites as far as legendary vehicles, what kind of decks are you going to end up building out of this idea? Are you just going to keep these vehicles in the 99? Are you still a vehicles hater? I know there's tons of vehicle haters out there now, especially after the letdown of Aether Drift. So we'd like to hear from you about that. Just, go drop us some comments and stuff down in the comments down below. Put the comments in the comments, and then we'll comment about your comment.
Exactly. He's got it. Also, you can reach out to us. Oh, you go for it, John.
No, I'm sorry. I was interrupting you. Go ahead. You go.
Oh, I was just going to say, if you don't want to leave us a comment, you can get with us directly on our Discord, which is linked down below. You can also do the act formerly known as tweeting at us on Blue Sky. This is both our official account, which is MTG Thoughtcast, or each of ours individually, which is John Thoughtcast or Joseph Thoughtcast on Blue Sky. Or you can send me an email at mtgthoughtcast@gmail.com. This has been a really fun one, John. I'm glad that we
come drive on by. Talk us about your new vehicle commander deck.
Oh, he's reaching now. We've reached the end of the episode.
End of the line, out of gas, time for a pit stop.
100%. Yes.
Also something spaceship.
Yes, for sure. Thank y'all for watching. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you so soon here on the MTG Thoughtcast.